The morning began like any other. The hollow neighborhood was quiet. The sun barely peeking through the rows of houses, birds chattering in the distance. But for him the day took a sharp turn before he even had his coffee. He stepped outside his front door, stretching his back, when the color caught his eye. A bright orange slip plastered to the windshield of his old dark sedan. The paper was bold, the letters printed large enough for even the passing joggers to read. Notice, Vehicle IN. Violation, must be removed immediately or subject to towing and fines. His jaw tightened, his fist curled, and his eyes scanned the street around him. Across the way 2 of his neighbors stood by their mailboxes, whispering, their smirks not even hidden. Further down another man pretended to check his trash can while staring in his direction. And on the corner he spotted her, the HOA president, arms folded across her chest, lips curled in satisfaction like a hunter watching prey walk into the trap. He pulled the slip from his windshield, the tape ripping loudly in the still air, and read every line, each word dripping with the arrogance of the homeowners association. Accusing him of parking illegally, accusing him of blocking community access, accusing him of violating rules he had never agreed to. His heart pounded as anger boiled inside, not because of the paper alone, but because this was not the first time. This was the 3rd time in 2 months. Each time the excuse had been different. First it was wrong side of the street. Then it was extended stay beyond visitor hours. Now it was blocking HOA property. And each time the president herself had been there, circling his home like a vulture waiting for the kill. He turned the notice over in his hand, the bright orange flapping in the morning breeze, and behind him he heard chuckles, one of the neighbors muttering loud enough for him to hear, "Guess she finally got him." His teeth clenched, his voice low as he asked, "Blocking what? My own house?" But no one answered, they only watched, waiting for a scene. He walked slowly around his car, examining the tires resting neatly against the curb, the license plates clean, registration up to date, no part of the vehicle sticking out into the street more than the others parked nearby. He looked further down and saw a row of SUVs and trucks lined along the same curb, none of them bearing the orange slip, none of them targeted, only his, always his chest tightened, not with shame but with the heat of injustice. The HOA president finally stepped forward, her heels clicking against the pavement, her eyes narrowed. "You've been warned before," she said sharply. "This street belongs to the community, not you, and you cannot just leave your car wherever you like." He stared at her, silent for a long moment. Then he lifted the slip and held it up between them, the orange glaring like a flame. "You think this street belongs to you?" he asked, his tone calm but sharp enough to cut. Her lips twitched, a flash of hesitation crossing her face, but she quickly recovered. "It belongs to the HOA, which means it belongs to us, and you are in violation." His neighbors shifted uncomfortably, some whispering, others grinning, enjoying the spectacle. But he did not back down. His eyes held hers, steady and unflinching, and then slowly, deliberately, he folded the slip into a neat square, slipped it into his pocket, and said, "We'll see about that." She opened her mouth to fire back, but before she could, the low rumble of an engine broke the tension. A tow truck rolled slowly into the street, its bright lights flashing as it came to a stop right behind his sedan. The driver climbed out, his hands already reaching for chains. The HOA president's smirk returned, her voice carrying across the street. "If you don't move it now, it'll be gone before lunch." The neighbors gasped and murmured, some stepping closer for a better view. The man stood still, his eyes locked on the tow truck, then back to the president, his heartbeat steady, his anger cold now, not fire but iron. The driver paused when he saw the way the man stood, firm in the middle of the street, hands at his sides but shoulders square. "Look," the driver muttered, scratching his beard. "I just do what they tell me. They called it in, said it's an HOA violation." The man nodded slowly, then said in a voice that carried across the clearing crowd, "Don't touch my car, not until this is settled in court." The driver hesitated, glancing at the president, then back at him. The air grew heavier. The neighbors leaned in, sensing the storm brewing. The president's voice cracked like a whip, his bluffing, "Hook it up now." But the driver shifted uncomfortably, muttering, "Not if there's a dispute, lady, I'm not risking a lawsuit." Her face twisted with rage, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, but the man only smiled faintly, calm and steady, as though he knew something she did not, as though he held a card no one else could see. The neighbors whispered louder now, some curious, some nervous, But all caught in the web of tension, the orange notice burned in his pocket. But in his heart burned something stronger, the knowledge that the game had just turned. For while the HOA thought they held power over the street, they did not know the truth he carried in his house, tucked neatly in a folder, stamped by the county. A truth that would not only shatter their arrogance but make them realize the road under their very feet did not belong to the association at all. It belonged to him. The orange slip still sat in his pocket, crumpled but heavy, as if it weighed more than paper. The tow truck idled on the street, its engine humming, the driver leaning against the door with crossed arms, clearly unwilling to take a step closer while the man stood there. Neighbors gathered in small knots, whispering and pointing, hungry for drama, and at the center of it all stood the HOA president, her chin high, her eyes sharp like glass. She was not used to being challenged, not used to someone staring back at her without fear. Move the car, she said again, her voice sharp enough to echo off the houses. But the man did not flinch. Instead he walked slowly toward his sedan, running his hand across the hood, calm, deliberate, as though he had all the time in the world. Then he leaned against it, folding his arms, the faintest smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, the kind of smile that made her twitch. It's not moving, he said, his voice steady and even. Not today, not tomorrow, not until I say so. The crowd stirred, whispers turned louder. A woman near the corner gasped, another man muttered, "He's crazy, she'll fine him into the ground." The president's lips curled. "You're already fined, and every day this sits here, the number grows." She waved a folder she carried in her hand, thick with papers, filled with rules and codes. "You can't win against this, the HOA rules are law here," she barked, raising her voice so everyone could hear. "The board decides where you can and can't park, and this car is in violation. Period." The neighbors nodded, some reluctantly, others eagerly, because for years her word had been treated as final. But he did not move, he did not raise his voice, he only smiled a little wider, shaking his head slowly. "Law?" he repeated, his tone calm, almost amused. "You think your rules are the law?" She froze for half a heartbeat, her face twitching at the confidence in his words. Then she snapped back, stepping closer, heels clacking against the pavement. "They are the law here, and you're just one man, one stubborn fool who doesn't know when to listen." She jabbed her finger toward him, the crowd buzzing at her boldness, but he simply tilted his head, his smile never fading. "And what if I know something you don't?" he asked softly, his voice cutting through the murmurs. Her eyes narrowed. "Bluffing won't save you. I've dealt with men like you before, stubborn, arrogant, always thinking they can stand against the board. But the board always wins." His laughter was quiet, not mocking, but sharp enough to make her cheeks flush red. "We'll see," he said again, the same words he had spoken earlier, and this time they landed heavier, because he said them not like a man cornered, but like a man holding a secret. The neighbors shifted, uneasy now, some whispering that maybe he really did have something. Maybe there was a reason he was so calm. The tow truck driver scratched his head, muttering, "Look, lady, if this gets ugly, I'm not touching it. I've got enough trouble." Without lawsuits, the president spun toward him, her voice rising, "You were hired to tow, so tow." But the driver shook his head. "Not when he's standing there like that. Not when he's calling it a dispute. I've been down that road before, ain't worth it." He climbed back into the truck, slamming the door shut, leaving her alone in the street with her folder of rules, her power cracking at the edges. The man pushed himself off the hood of the car, taking slow steps toward her, every eye in. The street locked on him. "You've thrown rules at me, you've thrown threats, you've even tried to drag my car away," he said calmly, his hands loose at his sides. "But let me tell you something. This street isn't what you think it is." Her breath hitched, just for a second, but she masked it quickly with a sneer. "More nonsense," she spat. "Do you really think anyone will believe you?" But her voice cracked, just enough for those close by to hear. The man stopped just a few feet from her, close enough that the orange light of the setting sun caught his face, close enough that she saw no fear in his eyes, only certainty. He slipped his hand into his jacket and pulled out a worn leather folder, thick with papers, stamped and sealed. He didn't open it yet. He only held it at his side, his faint smile still in place. The crowd gasped, some leaning closer, others whispering louder now. The president's face paled just a touch, her eyes flicking nervously to the folder before snapping back to him. "What's that?" she demanded, her voice shaking slightly despite her attempt at strength. His smile deepened. Something you should have checked before trying to bully me," he said, his words sharp, heavy, final. The neighbors erupted into louder whispers, the balance of power shifting in the air. The president's smug mask faltering as she realized for the first time that she might not be the one holding all the cards. He did not reveal the truth yet. He didn't need to. Not in that moment. The suspense was enough. His calm smile was enough. And as the sun dipped lower and the shadows stretched across the street, every person watching knew one thing with certainty. This was not a man beaten. This was a man about to turn the entire game upside down. The neighborhood had not seen this kind of tension in years. The air itself seemed to buzz as if the trees along the street were holding their breath. The man stood calm with the worn leather folder in his hand, not opening it, not explaining, just holding it like a silent weapon, and that alone unsettled the president more than any words could. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting quickly toward the neighbors who had gathered. She was used to their support, used to them nodding along with every order she barked. But now she saw doubt in their faces, whispers rippling through the crowd like wind through dry grass. She lifted her chin, trying to claw the moment back. "Neighbors," she called, her voice sharp and shrill. "Don't be fooled by this performance, his stalling, his trying to trick us with old scraps of paper." She shook the folder in her hand filled with HOA codes, slapping it for effect. "Our rules are the only law that matters here." Her words echoed down the street, but they did not land as solid as before. Someone whispered, "What if he really does have proof?" Another muttered, "He looks too sure." And their doubts spread like cracks in a frozen lake. The man did not speak. He let the silence linger. He let her voice strain, and then slowly he smiled again, leaning against his car like it was a throne. The orange violation notice still in his pocket, burning like a memory of every insult she had tried to throw. The tow truck driver, still in his cab with the engine idling, muttered to himself, "I'm not getting paid enough for this mess," refusing to move until someone gave him an order that wouldn't drag him into court. The president's cheeks flushed red, her control slipping. She turned back to him, voice sharp like broken glass. "You think you can outsmart me, but I'll bury you in fines, in court, in shame. You'll wish you had moved that junk car the second I told you." Her threats rolled through the air, but he did not blink. He reached up, tapped the folder once with his finger, and said softly but loud enough for the crowd, "Bury me? No, you've already buried yourself." The words cut through the whispers like a knife. Neighbors gasped, their eyes darting between him and her, waiting for the storm to break. The board members who had come with her shifted uncomfortably, one of them muttering under his breath, "Maybe we should just..." But her glare silenced him. She needed this battle public. She needed to crush him in front of everyone. So she stepped closer, her voice dripping with venom. "Then show us what you think. You have, let's end this charade." The man tilted his head, as if considering, then shook it slowly. "Not yet," he said calmly. "Not when you demand it, only when the truth decides the time." His refusal hit harder than a slap. She froze, her eyes wide for a moment before narrowing to slits. She hated nothing more than losing control. The neighbors laughed nervously, some covering their mouths, others whispering, his playing her like a fiddle. The tension thickened. Her voice rose higher. Shriller, "Fine, then you leave me no choice." She pulled out her phone, dialing quickly. "This is a direct order. I want his car towed. Now," she barked, her voice trembling with rage. The tow truck driver leaned out his window, shaking his head. "Lady, I already told you. If this goes to court I lose my license. You want it gone. You hook it yourself." The crowd erupted with laughter, sharp and biting. The president's face burned crimson, her power dissolving under the weight of doubt and mockery. The man pushed off his car, straightened his shoulders, and took a slow step forward, his voice calm but heavy. "You keep threatening, you keep shouting, but all you're doing is proving you never had the right in the first place." The neighbors leaned closer, captivated, some smiling now, some nodding quietly. The shift was happening, the storm was turning, and she knew it. Her fingers tightened around her phone, her voice breaking. "You don't know who you're dealing with." And for the first time since the fight began, she sounded less like a queen and more like someone cornered. The man's faint smile returned, his calmness unshaken. "Oh, I know exactly who I'm dealing with," he said softly. "But you have no idea who you're dealing with." The crowd gasped again, tension snapping sharp. The orange light of the sinking sun painted the street in fire, and every eye stayed locked on him. Because it was clear he wasn't bluffing, he was holding something bigger, something that would change everything, and the president could feel it pressing down on her. Though she refused to admit it, not yet, not until he chose to reveal it. The sun slid lower, washing the street in a deep orange glow, the air so heavy with tension that even the breeze seemed to pause. The tow truck sat idling, its yellow lights blinking lazily as if mocking the chaos it had been called into. Neighbors clustered tighter along the sidewalks, their whispers buzzing like a hive, children peeking from behind fences, adults crossing their arms and waiting for the explosion. At the center of it all stood the man, calm and still, leaning one hand on the hood of his car, the other gripping the worn leather folder at his side. He hadn't opened it yet, but just the sight of it kept everyone restless. Across from him, the HOA president's face was crimson with fury. Her voice strained from shouting, but she refused to let go. "Last chance," she screamed, jabbing her finger toward the car. "Move it now or it's gone tonight." Her words cracked in the air like a whip, but they did not land the way they once had. The crowd no longer nodded in blind agreement. Instead, their eyes flicked to the man, waiting for his answer, waiting for his move. The tow truck driver leaned out his window again, wiping sweat from his brow, his voice tired. "Lady, I told you, I can't hook a car when ownership is disputed. You want me to lose my license over this circus? Forget it." Laughter bubbled from the edges of the crowd, quick and nervous, but enough to make her flinch. She turned on the driver, shrieking, "You were hired to do a job, so do it." But the driver only spat on the ground and muttered, "Find another fool." Slamming his door shut, the sound echoed like a gavel. Her face twisted with rage as she realized she was losing the very tool she had brought to crush him. She spun back toward the man, voice trembling with frustration. "You think you're clever, hiding behind stunts and delays, but rules are rules, and this street belongs to the HOA, not you." The man's smile widened just a fraction, the kind of smile that unsettled her more than shouting ever could. He lifted the folder, tapping it lightly against his palm, his voice calm. "You keep saying that, but you've never once checked who this street actually belongs to, have you?" Her breath caught, a flicker of hesitation flashing in her eyes, quickly smothered under anger. "Nonsense." She spat, "You're bluffing. Everyone knows the streets are common property. Everyone knows they belong to the community." The neighbors stirred, their whispers sharp now. One man muttered, "Then why does he look so sure?" Another woman asked quietly, "What if he really has something?" The doubt spread, tightening the noose around her confidence. The man stepped away from his car, the folder now held firmly in both hands. He stopped in the middle of the street where the orange glow of the setting sun painted him in fire. "You called a tow truck to take my car off this street," he said slowly, his voice carrying with eerie calm. "But before you touch it, maybe you should know whose street this really is." The crowd fell silent, every eye fixed on the folder. The president laughed sharply, but it sounded hollow. "Show us then, prove your little fairy tale," she snapped. The man tilted his head, considering, then finally knelt down on the pavement, laying the folder across the hood of his car, his hands slow and deliberate as he undid the strap. The neighbors leaned forward, holding their breath. The president's smugness wavered, her fingers twitching against the folder she clutched, and when he finally opened it, the street itself seemed to grow quieter. The papers inside were old but well kept, stamped with county seals, signatures curling in black ink, deeds marked clearly with parcel numbers and boundaries. He lifted the top page and held it up high, his voice steady. "This isn't your street. It isn't the HOA street. It's mine, every inch of it." Gasps erupted, neighbors whispering louder now. The president's face went pale, her eyes darting wildly. "Fake," she choked out, her voice cracking. "Those are fake, they have to be." But the county seal gleamed in the fading light, undeniable, unshakable. The man laid the page on the hood for all to see, then lifted another, a survey map outlining the very road they all stood on, its boundaries marked clearly. His name scrawled on the latest registration. "This road was never signed over to you," he said, his voice growing heavier. "It was sold, transferred, and recorded, and now it belongs to me. Not your board, not your rules, me." The neighbors erupted, some gasping, some laughing, others shouting questions. The board members who had come with her shifted nervously, their eyes wide as they recognized the stamps and seals for what they were. Her folder of HOA codes looked suddenly cheap and powerless compared to the weight of county deeds. She stammered, pointing a shaking finger at him. This doesn't change anything. The HOA is still in charge. The HOA still has power. But her words fell flat. The crowd no longer believed her. Their eyes were on him, on the man who had turned a bright orange notice into a battlefield and then revealed he held the ground beneath them. The tow truck driver chuckled from his cab, shaking his head. "Lady, I'm definitely not touching that car." Now, his words drew more laughter, the sound rising louder than her shouts. The man stood tall, papers in his hand, calm as ever, and said simply, "You tried to force me off the street, but you forgot one thing. You don't own the street I stand on." The silence that followed was crushing. The president's lips trembled, her power slipping away with every second. And though the fight was not over, everyone knew the balance had shifted. The game she thought she controlled was no longer hers. And the man who stood against her was no fool. He was the owner of the very street beneath their feet. The street did not breathe for a moment after the reveal. Then sound rushed back all at once. Neighbors talking over one another, nervous laughter mixing with shocked questions. The tow truck's idle rumbling like a drum behind them. And in the middle of it the president swayed on her heels, her confidence cracked open. She tried to speak but only a thin hiss came out. Then she snapped the folder of HOA codes open as if paper could save her crown. "These documents mean nothing," she shouted, but her voice shook. "The association governs common areas, and the street is common." Yet the words sounded weak against the county seals glinting on the man's pages. He did not raise his voice. He did not gloat. He simply laid another deed flat on the hood and traced the boundary lines with one finger, slow and certain. "This road was never dedicated to the HOA," he said. "Never transferred. Never recorded to you. You built rules on land that was never yours." The crowd leaned closer, eyes widening as they recognized the street name, the parcel number, the little box where his name was typed neat and official. A teenager near the fence whispered, "He owns the whole road." And the whisper grew into a wave that rolled through every knot of people. Her board members moved in closer, faces pale. One leaned to her ear and whispered fast, but she jerked away, refusing to look frightened. "He forged them," she barked. "Call the county, call the police, I want him arrested." The tow truck driver blew out a breath, almost laughing. "Lady, you're about to get yourself arrested if you keep pushing a tow on a man's private road." And he switched off his lights, rolling his window up as if to seal himself away from the blast. She planted her feet like a general about to order a charge. But the soldiers were gone. The crowd was no longer with her. The board members stood with eyes on the papers, not her. A woman from 2 houses down stepped forward, voice careful. "If the street is his, you can't ticket us for parking anymore, right?" Another neighbor chimed in. "And the towing threats? The fines?" Their questions pricked holes in the president's posture. She whipped her head toward the man as if he had poisoned the air. "You're ruining order," she hissed. "Without rules, this place becomes chaos." And for a second the neighbors hesitated. Order was a comfort, even when given by someone cruel. The man felt that hesitation and he spoke into it, steady and quiet. "Order without truth is just control," he said. "Your rules are not order if they stand on lies." The words landed like weight on stone. The neighbors looked at one another, some nodding, some biting their lips as understanding clicked into place. One of the board members tried to gather courage and pointed at the papers. "Even if you own the road, you still have to follow HOA rules," he stammered. "We can still fine you for ugliness, for non-compliance." And the president grabbed that thread like a drowning person grabbing a rope. "Yes, yes, violations. Your ugly car, your ugly house, your non-compliance." She began to list infractions by memory, her voice rising faster, shaky, desperate. The man did not move. He let her voice burn out. Then he lifted a smaller page from the folder, a letter on county letterhead, stamped and signed, and read the single line that mattered. "Governing documents cannot be enforced on land not encumbered by covenant." He lifted his eyes. "This road is not encumbered. This lot is not encumbered. I never signed your covenant." Silence hit again, heavier than before. The neighbors who had been fined for mailbox height, for paint colors, for small cracks in their driveway, stared at the president with something new in their eyes, not fear, not respect, but anger. A man from the corner house stepped forward, voice cold. "Did you even check the records before you threatened to tow his car?" She faltered, then tried to recover. "We, of course we, our legal team." But the lie sagged halfway out of her mouth. The man closed the folder, not to hide the truth but to show the moment had moved on. "You said I blocked community property," he said, tapping the pavement with his boot. "I parked on my property, on my road. He nodded once toward the tow truck. "You can go." The driver did not wait for a second invitation. He threw the truck into gear and rolled away slow, flashing the man a two-finger salute through the glass as he went. The crowd parted to let the truck pass, then folded back into a tighter ring around the president. The space shrinking, the light fading, her control evaporating with the last color of the day. "You think this is over?" She tried again. But even her voice seemed smaller. "We'll file, we'll countersue, we'll—" The man's calm cut her off. "You've done enough for one day," he said, not cruel, just done. And he slid the folder under his arm. Then walked to the curb, opened his car door, sat, and turned the engine over. The idle purred soft, normal, like any other evening. But the sound felt to the president like a verdict. She stood frozen while the neighbors' whispers turned bolder. A woman said, "I want my deck fine reversed," a man added, "and my Christmas lights ticket." Another, with a quiet fury that scared even the board, said, "My disabled permit was denied because it ruined the look, fix that." The list of wounds the HOA had carved into the street came tumbling out, and with each one her shoulders sank lower. One board member finally found his voice and asked the man, almost pleading, "So what happens to us now?" The man rested his hands on the wheel and looked at the line of houses, the kids' chalk drawings at the sidewalk's edge, the tired shrubs trimmed into shapes no one liked, and he said simply, "We live like neighbors, not like subjects." That simple sentence broke something and healed something at the same time. The street exhaled. The crowd thinned as people drifted home in low murmurs, glancing back at the president who stood alone with her folder of rules that suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. A few loyalists hovered, but their eyes were full of questions she could not answer. The sky turned from orange to blue to the first grains of night, and still she stood, as if waiting for a hand to pull her back onto a throne that was already gone. Finally she snapped her folder shut and hissed, "This isn't finished." But it sounded like a wish and not a promise. She turned on her heel and stormed away, the two board members trailing after her like shadows losing their shape. The man switched off his engine and watched the last light fade from the street he now owned in the open. Not in secret, not only on paper, but in the minds of the people who lived on it. He slid the orange notice from his pocket, looked at it for a long second, then tore it clean down the middle and let the pieces fall into the passenger seat. His heartbeat finally slowed, the tight coil in his chest loosening into steady breath. He looked up at the quiet houses, at the porch lights winking on one by one, and he understood that the real victory was not that the tow truck left, not even that the papers were true. It was that fear had left with her, and in its place the street had found its voice, soft for now, but real. The night settled, crickets starting their song, and the man leaned back, eyes closed, a small tired smile on his face, knowing the fight would go on in other ways, paperwork, meetings, maybe even another courtroom. But tonight the road belonged to truth, and truth did not need to shout to be heard. Night faded into a quiet morning, but the air on the street still carried the weight of what had happened. Neighbors peeked through curtains as if expecting the HOA president to march back with reinforcements, but the street was still. The only sound the rumble of the man's old sedan as he started it and let it idle just to prove it was still there, still untouched, still his. The shredded pieces of the orange notice sat on his passenger seat, torn clean in half, and the sight of them made his jaw tighten, not in fear but in determination. He knew the HOA would not give up, not after being humiliated in front of everyone. And sure enough, by mid-morning another envelope appeared, not slapped on the windshield this time but stuffed into his mailbox. Thicker, heavier, stamped in bold red "Final Warning." He tore it open, eyes scanning line after line of threats, continued violation, daily fines accumulating, legal action pending. The words rang hollow now, empty teeth gnashing at nothing, but still designed to wear him down. He crumpled the letter and tossed it onto the table beside the folder of deeds. The folder he kept close now, like a weapon. His phone buzzed not long after, an unknown number. He answered to hear a man's smooth voice introducing himself as the HOA's attorney. The words polite but sharp. "We're prepared to escalate this matter in court if you don't comply." The man only replied calmly, "Good, because court is exactly where this belongs," and hung up before the attorney could spit more poison. By evening the whispers had spread again. Neighbors knocking on his door, some timid, some bold, asking if it was true, if he really owned the street. He didn't brag, didn't gloat, he simply showed them the deeds. Let them trace the county stamps with their own fingers, their eyes widening as the truth sank in. Words spread faster, and soon the HOA president found herself cornered not by him but by the very people she had ruled. Questions she couldn't answer. Anger she couldn't calm. She tried to call an emergency board meeting in the clubhouse, but half the neighborhood refused to attend, murmuring, "Why listen when she doesn't even own the road?" Her control was slipping like sand through her fingers. She tried harder, sending new letters, posting notices on lampposts, even hiring men to stand on the corner in reflective vests as if to intimidate. But each time the man stepped out calmly, his folder in hand, and each time the crowd grew bolder, laughter rising where once there had only been silence. The turning point came one afternoon when the sheriff's cruiser pulled into the street, the president rushing out with her stack of violations, waving them like a banner of war. "Arrest him." She demanded. "He refuses to obey the community rules." The deputy listened, flipping through the papers, then walked to the man, who silently handed over the deeds. The deputy studied them long, then handed them back with a nod, his voice loud enough for everyone. "This road is his. This is counter-verified. The HOA has no authority here." Gasps filled the air. The president's face drained of color, her hands trembling, but the deputy wasn't finished. He turned on her and said firmly, "And if you keep harassing him, that'll be a different kind of case." His warning struck like a hammer. The neighbors erupted in cheers and laughter, some clapping the man on the back, others shaking their heads in disbelief at the spectacle. The president stumbled away, her board members trailing after her like shadows trying not to be seen. The man stood steady in the center of the street, his car behind him, his folder pressed against his side, and for the first time he felt the street breathe differently, lighter, freer. Not just his by paper, but his in spirit. The neighbors who had once snickered now looked at him with respect, even gratitude. He didn't speak much, only nodded, only said quietly, "It's ours to live on, not to fear." And that was enough. The street itself seemed to sigh in relief, the sunset spilling gold across the pavement he owned. The war wasn't over. He knew the HOA would try again with thicker papers and louder threats, but their power had cracked. And once cracks start, walls always fall. He walked back into his house, the folder safe in his hand, the sound of children laughing outside for the first time in weeks, and he allowed himself the smallest smile, knowing the fight was turning, and this time the weight of the street was behind him. The days that followed pushed the HOA from angry to desperate. Their polished smiles turned sharp, their letters thicker, their tricks uglier. They tried everything they could think of to claw back control. First came a fresh stack of notices taped to lampposts. At dawn, printed in bold black ink, "Temporary construction. Parking prohibited on all community roads." As if a sign could erase a deed, the man stepped outside, read one slowly, then peeled it down and folded it into his pocket. His neighbors watched from porches, waiting to see if he would fight again. He didn't shout, he didn't rage, he simply set a chair on the edge of his curb, opened his folder on his lap, and let the morning pass like it belonged to him, because it did. By noon a private security SUV rolled in, the kind with a light bar and a logo designed to look official. 2 guards climbed out and started placing cones along his stretch of street. The president hurried behind them with a clipboard, eager and breathless. "This area is closed," she announced to no one in particular. "Compliance check." The guards avoided his eyes, but their hands moved fast, as if speed could make it legal. He stood, closed the folder, and walked toward them. Calm as the day before. "Remove the cones," he said. The shorter guard shrugged, "Says it's closed," and pointed at the president like a child asking for permission. The man didn't look at her. He only lifted one page, the certified deed with the parcel lines, held it at chest height, and said, "This isn't the community, this is my road." The guards stared at the seal, then at each other, then at the man's face. Something in their posture sagged. They'd been in jobs like this before. They knew a cliff when they were asked to drive off it. "Call your supervisor," the taller one muttered. But when his phone found nothing useful on the other end, he started picking up cones. The president snapped, "Leave them." But the guard answered without looking up, "Not getting sued for a cone, lady," and loaded the last one into the trunk. The SUV rolled away under a chorus of neighbor whispers that sounded a lot like laughter. The president's eyes flashed, humiliated but still hunting an angle. That evening she sent a mass email claiming the HOA had acquired the street through long use, and would begin repaving improvements that required temporary surrender of access. She used the kind of words that scared people because they were heavy and vague, The man read it once and then called the county road office, where a tired clerk confirmed in one bored sentence what he already knew. We don't repave private property. He printed that sentence, taped it to his window where everyone walking a dog could read it, and went back to patching a squeaky gate, the next morning afresh. Blow landed, a letter marked Lien Notice, intent to file, threatening his home because of unpaid community dues. The man sat at his table and let the paper rest there, not touching it, just breathing, remembering the old cabin fight in his bones, remembering how bullies get louder when they start to lose. Then he dialed a title company and asked for an affidavit of ownership and encumbrances. By the afternoon he had 2 neat pages that said in cold simple language what the president could not erase, no HOA covenant recorded against said parcel or roadway. He slipped those behind the deed in the folder and felt the street itself seem to relax under his steps. The neighbors were changing too. He could feel it in their voices, fear thinning, anger focusing. A man from the corner organized a petition to recall the board. A mother 3 houses down sent a group text asking for a community meeting without the queen. The elderly couple with the rose bushes brought him lemonade on a tray and said softly that they had paid fines for years because they didn't know they could say no. We're done hiding. The old man said, his hands shaking with something that wasn't age. The president saw the faces turning and pushed harder. She ordered a contractor to paint fresh no parking, and stencils on his curb at sunrise. But the painter took one look at the papers and refused. That's private, he said, and drove away with his ladder still rattling. She tried the sheriff again, this time with a thicker packet full of photos and highlighted violations. The deputy who arrived had been briefed since last time. He took 2 minutes to scan the folder and then spoke in a voice everyone could hear. Quit calling us for civil matters you know you don't control. He added a second sentence quieter, a warning with edges, and stop sending people to harass him. The board's group chat must have lit up like a fire after that, because the next move came not from clipboards or cones but from a law office, a formal notice stamped motion for injunction. The kind of paper meant to freeze a problem where it stands. The kind of paper that looks like a wall if you've never pushed one. The man read it carefully, line by line, then drove to the courthouse and filed his own response, attaching his deed, his survey, the title affidavits, and a simple statement that said he wasn't blocking community access because the community had never owned a single inch under his tires. He walked out under a sky that felt wide open and bright, and when he pulled back onto his road he slowed just to feel the pavement under him. His pavement. That night the street held a meeting on folding chairs between mailboxes, no podium, no gavel, just people and their voices, some angry, some tired, some still afraid. He stood only when asked, speaking few words and only the kind that mattered. I won because I had proof and I didn't back down. He said, you can do the same. Heads nodded. Small at first, then stronger. Someone asked if he would help them file open records requests to see how fines had been decided. Someone else asked if they could audit the HOA books. The president didn't come. But her car idled at the far end of the block like a shadow refusing to join the light. When the chairs folded and people drifted home, the man sat on his hood and watched the stars appear one by one. He thought about the courtroom, about the judge who would soon read both stacks of paper and see what everyone on the street now saw with their own eyes. He thought about the first orange notice and how it had felt like a spotlight of shame. And he smiled at how small that memory looked now next to a row of porch lights glowing easy and warm. The email came just after midnight. The court had set a date, early, fast, sooner than anyone expected. The president must have asked for it thinking speed would crush him. But speed only meant the truth would land quicker. He closed the laptop and leaned his head back against the windshield, letting the cool night soak the heat out of his bones. Tomorrow he would scan the last documents, print the photos with the county seals big as a fist, maybe call the title officer to see if she'd testify by phone. He did not plan speeches. He did not sharpen insults. He just gathered facts like stones and stacked them the way you build a wall that doesn't fall. Dawn crept in gray and quiet, and the street woke calm. No cones, no trucks. Only the tick-tick of sprinklers and the soft scrape of someone sweeping their step. It felt like the pause before a verdict. Like the breath a crowd holds when the curtain starts to rise. And the man, steady as ever, slid the folder under his arm and whispered, not to the president, not to the neighbors, but to the road itself, we finish this. The morning of the hearing arrived with a gray sky and air heavy like stone. The man woke before the alarm, not because he was nervous, but because his body carried the weight of what was coming. He brewed his coffee slow, the folder of deeds and affidavits sitting neatly on the table beside him. He ran his hand across the leather cover once, as though drawing strength from the weight of truth inside. Outside the street was unusually still, no kids on bikes, no joggers, even the dogs seemed quieter. Neighbors peeked from windows as he walked to his car with the folder tucked under his arm. Some nodded, some lifted a hand, none spoke, but their silence felt like a kind of prayer. He drove the old sedan out of the hollow, the same car that had been marked with the bright orange slip, its tires humming steady against pavement that was his. As the courthouse came into view, the flag flapping against the dull sky, he felt no fear, only a calm resolve. Inside the building the halls echoed with polished shoes and murmurs, and when he stepped into the courtroom the air shifted. The benches filled with neighbors, reporters, even strangers who had heard the story of the man who claimed to own the road. On one side of the room sat the HOA president, flanked by two lawyers in crisp suits, her face painted in its usual mask of control, but the tightness in her jaw betrayed the cracks. The lawyers stacked thick binders on the table, flipping through them with the arrogance of men who thought weight equaled truth. On the other side the man set his folder down, no binders, no army, only the same leather cover and the quiet certainty in his eyes. The judge entered, the gavel struck, and the room fell into silence. The HOA lawyer rose first, his voice smooth, polished, trained. He painted a picture of chaos, a stubborn homeowner refusing rules, a community crumbling without order. He waved photographs of the car, of notices, of supposed violations. Each word meant to tighten the noose. The crowd shifted uneasily. The president sat straighter, nodding at each point, her confidence growing as the lawyer's voice swelled. But when he finished and returned to his seat, the room turned to the man. He stood slowly, unhurried, the folder in his hand. He walked to the front, opened it, and laid the first deed flat on the table, his voice steady and simple. This road has never belonged to the HOA. It was never transferred, never encumbered. Here is the original deed. He lifted the second page, the survey map, showing the parcel lines, the county seals clear under the light. Here is the county survey proving my ownership. He placed the affidavit on top. Here is the title company's confirmation, stating no covenant binds this property. He did not raise his voice, he did not dramatize, he let the papers speak. The silence in the room was heavier than shouting. The judge leaned forward, adjusting glasses, eyes scanning every line, every stamp. The HOA lawyer jumped up, shouting, "Objection, these could be doctored." But the judge's hand rose sharp, silencing him. "These are county certified," the judge said firmly. "They stand unless you provide stronger evidence." The president's face drained of color, her nails digging into the table. The neighbors gasped, whispers rising like wind. The man closed the folder softly, looked up, and said the words that broke the air apart. "This car sits on my road, my property. Your threats were never law, they were lies." The judge's gavel struck, once, twice, the sound final. The court recognizes the deeded ownership of the road by the defendant. The judge's voice echoed. The HOA has no jurisdiction, no authority, no claim. The room erupted, neighbors cheering, some clapping, reporters scribbling furiously. The president shot to her feet, shouting that it wasn't over, that appeals would follow. But her words drowned in the roar of voices. The board members at her side slumped, their heads bowed. The lawyers closed their binders with tight jaws, knowing the fight was lost. The man did not gloat, he did not shout, he only gathered his papers, tucked them back into the folder, and nodded once at the judge. Outside the courthouse the steps overflowed with people, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward, questions shouted. How does it feel to own the street? What happens next? He answered none, only walked calm through the crowd, the folder under his arm, the same faint smile on his face. When he turned into his neighborhood, the sight made his chest ache. Neighbors lined the sidewalks, waiting, some clapped, some waved, children held chalk drawings that read "Our Street." The old couple with the roses stood side by side, tears in their eyes, and as he pulled his car to the curb, right where the orange slip had once been, the cheers rose louder, filling the hollow like thunder. The president's house sat dark, curtains drawn, her car absent, her throne toppled. The man sat behind the wheel, hand resting on the folder, and breathed deep. The street was quiet again, but not with fear, with freedom, and as the porch lights flickered on one by one, he whispered to himself, "We finish it tonight." Because though the ruling was clear, He knew shadows still lingered, and he was ready for the last strike when it came. The court ruling echoed long after the gavel struck, but the true battle moved back to the street. The hollow was different now, lighter, freer. Neighbors who once kept their heads down walked taller, their steps easier, no longer afraid of violation slips tucked under wipers or warnings stuffed in mailboxes. Yet in the shadows of shuttered blinds, the HOA president simmered. Her pride cracked but not broken. She fired off emails late into the night, long rants about illegal judgments and temporary rulings, promising appeals that never came. Her words lost power the moment the county record stood against her. Still she tried, sending out letters with bold headings like community fees past due and urgent compliance notice. But one by one neighbors began tearing them up, no longer trembling, no longer paying fines for mailboxes too tall or shutters the wrong shade of beige. The man watched all this quietly, from his porch, from the hood of his car, the same car that had sparked the war, the same car that now sat like a symbol. Neighbors passed by with waves. Children pedaled bikes across the very pavement the HOA once tried to control. Laughter rising where silence used to weigh heavy, and every sound reminded him that power had shifted. The president did not give up gracefully. She stormed door to door with her clipboard, demanding signatures for petitions that no one wanted. People closed doors on her face, some politely, some not. An old woman told her bluntly, "You've stolen enough from us, go home," and slammed the door. Whispers followed her wherever she walked, whispers of lawsuits, of audits, of money spent without receipts. For years she had ruled like a queen. Now she scurried like a rat chased into the light. One evening she called for a board meeting, but only 2 loyalists showed, the rest of the chairs empty. The clubhouse, once her throne, now an echo chamber. Neighbors gathered outside instead, folding chairs set up in the street. A circle of voices free from her gavel. They asked the man to sit with them. And though he was not the kind to seek spotlight, he did, the papers resting in his lap, the folder never far. He spoke few words but they carried weight. "You've all lived under fear, under rules never meant to help you. Now you know the truth, you don't need them anymore." The crowd murmured agreement. Some shouted their stories. A father fined for a basketball hoop, a family charged for planting tomatoes in their yard, an old veteran ticketed for flying his flag on the wrong day. Each story burned away the last threads of loyalty to the HOA. As the night deepened and porch lights flickered on, the petition passed from hand to hand, signatures filling every line, a vote for dissolution, for freedom. The president appeared at the edge of the crowd, her face pale, her eyes wild. She shouted that it was illegal, that they couldn't do this, but no one listened. The voices rose together, drowning her out. For the first time she was powerless. She retreated back into the dark of her house, her windows closing tight. The next morning the street awoke with chalk drawings in big letters, "Our road, no HOA." The laughter of children rolling wheels over words of victory. The man walked the length of the pavement, his boots steady, his chest light. The neighbors waved, shook his hand, thanked him again and again. But he only nodded, saying little, because he knew the truth was bigger than one man. The truth was that fear had cracked, control had shattered, and once a wall breaks, it cannot be built the same again. The HOA's lawyers sent one last letter, thin this time, no threats bold, only a line suggesting negotiation. He burned it in his fireplace without reply, the ashes drifting up the chimney like the last gasp of a dying beast. The president stopped showing her face after that, her house dark, her driveway empty. Some said she had moved, others said she stayed inside, hiding from the stairs. Either way she no longer ruled, no longer mattered. The street belonged to itself again, and to him most of all. One evening he stood at the edge of his property, watching the sunset spill across the asphalt. The same road where the orange slip had once clung to his windshield. The same road where tow trucks and threats had tried to break him. Now glowing gold in the fading light, he whispered to himself, they tried to take it, but it was never theirs. And the street answered with silence deep and calm, like a promise that it would never again bow to false power. The neighbors carried on, freer, louder, brighter, and though the battle had scarred them, it had also bound them, not under an HOA, but under truth, the kind that no rulebook could erase. The man sat on his porch, folder beside him, car in its place, and for the first time in a long time, the hollow felt alive, not under control, but under freedom, and he knew the fight had not only saved his car, it had saved them all. The weeks rolled on and the street began to heal. The The scars of years under the HOA did not vanish overnight. But laughter replaced whispers, and porch lights glowed softer now, not as beacons of control but as lamps of peace. The president's house sat dark, curtains pulled, mailbox overflowing. Some said she had left town. Others said she was hiding in shame. Either way, she was gone from their lives. Her rules scattered like leaves in wind. The board dissolved piece by piece. Men and women who once enforced her will quietly step down, their seats empty, their voices silenced, the clubhouse locked and abandoned, weeds growing through its perfect walkway. But the street itself thrived. Families planted gardens without fear. Flags waved from porches. Children chalked the pavement with colors that once would have drawn fines. The man watched all of it quietly, sitting on his porch or leaning against his car. The same car that had been the start of it all. The car that still sat in its place, never moved out of fear again. Neighbors often stopped to thank him, some with words, some with handshakes, some with simple nods, but he always answered the same way. You did this yourselves, I just showed you the truth. He knew the truth was heavier than any orange notice, heavier than any rule. Truth had carried him through. The folder of deeds and surveys still rested by his chair inside, untouched most days now, but always there, like a sword in its sheath, waiting. One evening the county clerk himself came to the hollow, a gray-haired man in a neat suit, carrying a new set of documents. He handed them to the man with a smile. Your ownership is now recorded publicly, stamped beyond dispute. No HOA, no appeal can touch it again. The man signed quietly, his name etching itself into history. The road now his by record and by memory. The neighbors clapped when they heard, cheering loud enough to carry through the trees. But he only smiled faintly, knowing this was the end of the battle and the beginning of something else. Life without fear, freedom without chains. The president never returned. Her house was sold at auction months later, bought by a young couple who planted flowers instead of rules. No one mentioned her name again. The street belonged to itself, and to the man who had stood against it all. Years later people still told the story, at diners, at barbershops, at schoolyards. Remember the guy who bought the whole road, they'd say. Remember how the HOA tried to tow his car and found out he owned the street under their feet. Children who had been too young at the time grew up hearing it as a kind of legend. A reminder that paper cuts both ways. That truth, when held tight, can outlast power. The man never sought fame, never sought wealth. He simply lived, tending his garden, fixing his gate, watching the sunset burn gold across the pavement he had defended. The car grew older, the paint faded, the tires worn, but he never sold it, never replaced it, because it was more than a car. It was proof. One evening, as the sky turned purple and crickets sang, he stood at the edge of his road, the road they had tried to take, and whispered softly, from one orange slip to this, his voice carrying only to himself and the quiet trees. They thought they could bury me in rules, but truth was deeper than their paper. He looked back at the houses, the porches, the lights, the people living free, and he smiled, because he knew the fight had not been about a car, not about fines, not even about him. It had been about breaking the chains of fear that held an entire street. And now the chains lay broken forever. The night settled over the hollow, calm and sure, and the man walked back to his porch. His car resting steady in its place, his folder safe inside, his heart at peace. The war was over, the road was his, and it would always be.